What is up, guys? Today I'm here with my friend Tim Andrews. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Dylan.
And today we're talking about the law. We're talking about why the system is so complex and why it costs so much. I don't know anything about, well, I've seen a few TV shows. I don't know much about the law. So hopefully Tim can enlighten me today. Tim.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not a lawyer. I haven't gone through law school or anything like that, but I have had a few personal dealings with the law myself. And that has informed my understanding and belief of the legal system we have here in New Zealand, and some significant flaws that are fairly easily solved.
Right. And so what we say are the biggest issues in the current New Zealand law system?
So I would say the biggest issue that I personally have come across is the fact that the law is necessarily or unnecessarily prohibitive, in that the legislation, if you're an academic sort of person, you'll be able to understand the legislation, right? You can read through it, you can pick up the general gist of it. But even then, they use a lot of words that they have, shall we term, special meanings, where those meanings aren't defined anywhere, but all the lawyers understand what they mean, because they've gone through law school, they understand what they're talking about. But you can't find that anywhere. So if you're not a lawyer, you have to read into it contextually, which makes it unnecessarily prohibitive.
Right.
The thing that if one day I woke up, I was a millionaire, won the lotto, those sort of things, what I would love to be able to do is to get some of the best lawyers in the country to go through and make common English guides, or at least explanations of legislation that apply to everyday people. An example that already has been done is consumer.org. So that provides to your everyday consumer, it gives an amazing guideline explanation of our Fair Trading Act and all the different legislation that applies to your everyday consumer when they're going out and buying things. Now, that is absolutely amazing. And as you can see, as I'm sure you would have seen yourself, Dylan, when it comes to, you have your community Facebook groups and someone got screwed over on buying a shitty car, those sort of things, you'll see there'll be at least 3 or 4 comments in there, oh, you have these rights, you have those rights. Now, these people aren't lawyers. They haven't gone to law school. They haven't read the legislation either. They would have used something like consumer.org to understand their rights under the legislation. And the best thing is, it's not as complex as the legislation itself. It's written in common English, and that makes it non-prohibitive. They're taking away the gatekeeping that is currently in place.
Yeah, for sure. It's the barrier to entry if you want to file a legal thing.
Definitely.
It's quite large,
Yeah.
right? But
And
it shouldn't be like that. I mean, is it really as complex as they make it seem? Or is it simply the words they're using to hide the fact or hide the real meaning behind it? Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, a lot of the situations, and a lot of the law in New Zealand, at least so far as I've seen, it is complicated. I'm not going to sit here and say, nah, it's easy, man. What are you talking about? It is complicated. But it isn't as necessarily as complicated as what it makes it out to be. Like, even with the specific wording of the legislation, the way that they format it and everything like that, they could make it so much easier. But I do understand that the way that the law is written, they do have some restrictions in that regard. But that's why having just a site exactly like consumer.org, but for other areas of the law, could be so powerful. Like an example of which for employment legislation is employment.govt. It is an amazing guidance for your everyday worker to help them understand their legal rights in some employment situations. Now, is it amazing? No. Can it be helped, especially when it comes to procedures and procedural aspects that you'll face when going through different areas? It definitely could use a lot of work there. But even then, it's still showing a lot of power that is given to your everyday consumers when they actually go and when they understand their rights. Because every day in New Zealand, so many people have issues that they wouldn't if they knew their legal rights. And it actually seems to be that there is a startling and very surprising circumstance where a lot of people, if they actually utilize their rights, they are the bad guys. And you'll see that a lot in employment situations when people stand up for their rights, when they realize, hey, that's not right. You know, I have these rights and you aren't doing that, you dog. They are made out to be the bad guys. You know, they're the ones causing problems. They're the ones being this terrible person, this troublemaker. When it comes down to it, they're actually holding their employer to their rights. And that is a massive thing.
It's like there's a corporate incentive to socially police people into seeing a certain point of view and believing that when, well, it's in their best incentive to make sure that people are in line. And if people aren't in line, what's the best way to do that? It's through indirect forms of social policing.
Of course.
You know, making propaganda or changing how people feel in society. And so if you can control those changes, you also are going to make people less willing or able to go out and exercise their rights, right?
Exactly. And one amazing example is when it came to it was holiday pay. Basically, long story short, there was many companies across New Zealand who have been for the last 10, 20 years incorrectly paying holiday pay. And they've been doing this for many years. They were doing this for everyone. And that was a massive issue. Because at the end of the day, no one really understood their legal rights in those situations. To give you an example, or to talk more about that example, if you work even 1 hour of a public holiday, you are entitled to a full day of leave, or public holiday leave, whatever they call it. Right. You get a day in lieu. You work even 1 hour of that public holiday, you get a full day in lieu. Now, that is the law. But almost every massive company, and honestly, almost all companies, they were doing that incorrectly. Whether that was intentionally or otherwise, and personally, I think it was intentionally, because there's no way the lawyers could have misunderstood that. You know, there's no way that they could have looked at the actual legislation and gone, let's play around with it a bit.
Yeah, you don't go to law school for 5 to 8 years and not understand like a really simple thing, right?
Well, don't get me wrong. It wasn't that it wasn't straightforward, right? They made it unnecessarily complex in the actual procedure side of things. But in saying that, when it came down to it, and there were even situations where multiple people that I know had actually, previous to this, to the government going, "Whoa, you guys aren't doing it right," they'd actually gone to these companies and gone, "Hey, actually, this is not right. Here is the legal entitlements," and the company would have paid them the legal entitlements. But they didn't do it for everyone, as they're legally bound to. And I know multiple different companies that have had that happen to them, and they didn't change it for everyone. They just changed it for the person who spoke up about it. So it's just another example of that. That if there was a situation where this organization had actually made it clear to everyone what their legal rights are, people wouldn't have had to wait 5, 10, 20 years to get the payout that they rightly should have gotten that day, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what do you think could be a way to help mitigate this in society, to get companies more in line or to allow people to know their rights better? What do you think the government or a body needs to start doing?
So if, like I said, that if I woke up, you know, a lotto winner, multimillionaire tomorrow, what I would do is I would go out and get experienced lawyers in every area of the law to go through and make common English guides for these different legislations that apply to everyday consumers. So in saying that, I'm not going to say that, you know, they'll go through the legislation and give everyday examples. Sorry, they won't go through and give exact examples. They won't go through and say, "Hey, Dylan, here's your situation. Here's what you need to do about it." But just to give people an idea, an overview, so they can at least understand more about the issue and their rights. That would give... Now, it wouldn't solve the entire issue overnight, right? It's not a perfect solution, but in saying that, it gives the consumer and it gives everyday people a hell of a lot more power in those situations they would have otherwise. Because then they can go, and they can read into the examples they would be given. And they go, oh, there's the similarities. Hey, that's exactly like my case. Perfect. And then from there, they can decide, maybe this is worth getting some legal advice. Maybe not. But at least then they've got a more of an understanding in saying, hey, actually, I do have grounds here. I do have legal rights. As opposed to some illegible, legislation that they're never going to understand.
Absolutely.
One further example, actually, and this is one that I actually went into a few weeks ago, is with WINZ. WINZ, Work and Income New Zealand.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the job seeker benefit, there is a dramatic difference between WINZ's eligibility criteria and the actual legislation prescribed to the eligibility criteria. When it comes down to it, there is a massive difference. And what WINZ are saying is the criteria and what it actually is under the legislation are dramatically different. And what that means is that there likely are many people who get denied the benefit when they shouldn't. Because the wording in the legislation is that if you meet the legal tests, you are entitled to that money. WINZ should not and do not under the legislation have any wiggle room there. That if you're entitled to it, you should be getting paid that money in your bank account.
For sure.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some extenuating circumstances, of course, as there are for most things. But you know what I mean?
Exactly. And if somebody was in that circumstance, if they were on WINZ, they wouldn't have the money to hire a lawyer in the first place to even, exercise that right. If they didn't know, or
exactly,
perhaps they did know, and the other person on the other end of the line said, hey, no, it's not like this. How would you even go about contesting that if it wasn't something that was publicly known, or you could link them a website where it was actually listed out and have that conversation?
Exactly, yeah, because you can actually go right now and look at the difference between what is on the WINZ site and what has been said by WINZ and compare that to what is actually in the legislation, and you will see marked differences between the two. And what that means is exactly like you said, that when it comes down to it, there are going to be people who, for whatever reason, if they're at this time of their life where they don't have a job, they can barely scrape by, they don't want to kick up a fuss. You know what I mean? They don't want WINZ to take away those last few dollars and kick them out on the street. They, for lack of a better term, when they get to this point, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And if they kick up, there's every chance that WINZ will cut off their payments. And it's not to say that they necessarily would, but that is a risk that a lot of people will have bearing in the back of their minds. And when it comes down to it, that is, to me at least, that's like a form of bullying. That, you're essentially oppressing these people to try and get them not to kick back when they should. That's their legal rights. And when it comes down to it, New Zealanders as a whole have a very, very strange belief and mindset around this sort of thing, where if you are the one standing up for your legal rights, you are seen as the troublemaker. You're the problem. Not the person who's abusing you, not the person who's, not holding to your rights, not doing what they should. You're the person who's the problem because you're the one who's bringing it up, who's kicking up this whole fuss. And it's not seen in any one particular area. That is a very common theme across all themes of law. And it is incredibly strange to me that, not to get into the whole, conspiracy side of things, but the corporate interests clearly have got a good thing going on there. You know what I mean? That they get to abuse people and no one really does anything about it. Because even if they do bring it up, they're the bad guys. It's saddening and it's strange.
Yeah, that's sad for sure. Like there's every incentive for the corporations to continue what they're doing, and therefore the government as well. And so if nobody speaks up about this or actually tries to change things, it's not going to happen. Going to your point about how you're seen as the bad guy if you kind of speak up or exercise your right or give your story. I do wonder if that's more of a New Zealand thing. People often say we have tall poppy syndrome. And so in general, people that try to elevate themselves or stand up for their rights often are oppressed by the more mainstream idea or mainstream narrative compared to maybe a more outspoken country like America or countries in Europe where people are very opinionated and very used to different ideas and very accepting of different ideas. And so I do wonder if it's a small country thing. New Zealand is, 4 million, which is 5 million, which is literally the size of a city in America. Crazy to think about, right? So tiny. And so when you know everybody or know, a lot of people when you live in these small towns, obviously in circumstances like that, often people start to think in very similar ways and they don't want to think outside of the social norm because it's so well enforced within this small little town or city of only a couple 100,000 people like where we live. Yeah.
And I think one of the other big things, at least for me and my thoughts on it, is that a lot of people wish they would stand up for their rights. A lot of people wish that they would be able to do something like that. But when they see someone else doing it, they're doing what this person wishes they could do and what they should do. So instead of doing it themselves, they want to downtrod everyone else so they feel better about not doing anything themselves. And that is a very common thing as well, that bringing everyone down to be the common denominator as opposed to raising everyone up to the appropriate level. And that is something else that I think is very, very harmful. It's a very harmful mindset.
It's super harmful. And it happens all the time, people cutting each other down, or even when you start to be a bit more successful or try to do something different or creative, people, in a sense, don't like that.
Yeah.
Because if you do something they know they can't do, it intimidates them.
And it highlights their insecurities and their own flaws. Exactly, yeah.
Exactly. A lot of people don't want to be friends with somebody that is always pushing their boundaries and becoming better, because what does that say about you? You look to them, and if, in the conversation you say, hey, I've done X, Y, Z, and then they think about their life, it's sort of a constant reminder. A constant reminder of where they are compared to you, and often that might be a projective narrative. It's not even substantial or real. And if they realize, hey, I could actually use this person's skills to better myself, that could be cool too. But that is a bit more difficult road to go down. And so people usually take the easier road of moving away from that person or distancing themselves
or trying to cut them down.
The other person down. Yeah.
No, definitely. And exactly like you said, that's the tall poppy syndrome in a nutshell. That a lot of people will see people getting up and up and up and doing better and better. And instead of raising themselves up, they want to bring everyone else down. So they feel better where they are down here as opposed to trying to get up there. And, I mean, it's harmful to them, it's harmful to everyone else, and it really is not conducive to a growth society. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're friends with someone, if you really love them, don't you want the best for them? But
absolutely. You'd hope so, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
But I think we can all be mindful of it too. Because everybody exhibits a bit of jealousy. And I thought I was the most open person. But then one of my friends, was doing all this business stuff. And for a moment, I actually felt like, oh man, he's doing really well. And in a sense, it made me feel a little insecure. But I caught myself and I thought, hey, I need to shift how I'm thinking and move out of that judgment or negative feeling.
Well, I think honestly,
for
me, when you get those feelings of insecurity and those sort of things, especially when it's been brought up because of someone else's success, to me that's an amazing thing, because then you get to see, I wish I was able to do that. I wish I was there. I wish I was doing the same thing. That's your brain telling you that's what you want to do. And then all you need to do is you listen to it and go, hey, you know what? Because I can do that, why don't I do that?
Exactly.
And then you go out and do it.
Exactly. Transform that insecurity into motivation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
insecurity is the low-level paradigm, and you can choose whether to take that down a negative route or a positive route. But if you can transform that insecurity into positivity and then inspiration, that is taking you in the direction you probably want to take, and it's a more ideal direction.
Of course, of course.